Welcome. This is an exclusive interview that was done with Tom Malterre, our EHS on-the-ground news reporter, with Professor Gregor Reid at the Environmental Health Symposium this year, 2018. Professor Reid is known as the modern father of probiotics. He's published over 500 research articles in the medical literature. He's done public health research in Africa with probiotics and metal toxicity. And this interview includes some very surprising and new information about probiotics and the microbiome in human and planetary health. So please enjoy this free interview. If you want more, Environmental Health Symposium, all of our lectures are archived on the website. You can access them there. Enjoy.
Hi, Tom Malterre here, medical correspondent at the Environmental Health Symposium, and I'm here with Dr. Gregor Reid, who's from the Lawson Institute and Western University up in Canada, where he's a professor. And Dr. Reid is an incredible, prolific researcher and publisher of over 500 papers now, and he's looked at an extensive amount of information surrounding the microbiome. So can you summarize for us what you're looking at currently?
Well, I think I'd say it's a number of things. So we're looking in our group, and it's not just me, as quite a number of us, looking at fecal microbiota transplant, for example, even in multiple sclerosis, so we'll have a study on that. Yeah. We're looking at how we can manipulate breast cancer microbiome, because we think there's a link. We haven't proved that microbes cause cancer, but there's a link. Yeah. And so if we can manipulate the microbes in the breast, then maybe you reduce the risk of cancer. Maybe it does nothing, but we'll find out. Looking at the urinary, vaginal microbiota, because we've done that for quite a long time. Right. And I guess my pet sort of thing right now is honeybees and also just humans being exposed to environmental pollutants, and that's why it's interesting to be here, because we can't escape them, and there's some naturally occurring pollutants. There's many man-made pollutants, and we do quite a lot of work in Africa, which I'll talk about at this meeting, where we're trying to empower people to provide children with probiotic fermented food. And when you look at Africa, it's particularly where we are in Lake Victoria. In fact, recently there was a report saying Lake Victoria is dead. Wow. And so you have this massive pollution in a place that is essentially feeding 30 million people, is providing water and fish. And if the fish are contaminated, in Canada we can say, okay, I'll catch the fish, but I won't eat it. But you can't do that there. So I've been very interested in that, and the value chain, and the value chain really starts at the bee. Because if you don't have pollination, you don't have a third of the world's crops. So we then started looking at, well, pesticides are damaging bees, so could a probiotic affect that? And it turns out we think that in fact you can. So I'll be presenting work on bees.
I have to interrupt you for 1 second here so everybody understands what's going on here, because you're blowing my mind. But what I'm hearing is that we evolved in a soup of microbes. Yeah. And that everything that occurs to us usually passes through quite a few million microbes before it even interacts with us. Yeah. And what you're researching now is the environmental impacts that chemicals have on humans and have on insects, and how those chemicals and their change in our physiology and the insect physiology is altered when there are certain microbes around. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, you're right. We live in a microbial world, and I have been trying to promote fermented foods on the Canada Health Guide, Health Food Guide, and I wrote to Health Canada and indicated very, very good research papers on why that we should have a fifth item. So in Canada, we recommend meats, grains, vegetables, and dairy. Yeah. So what I was saying was put another one, fermented food. Yeah. Recognizing humans are microbial, and recognizing we came from this, and fermented foods and probiotics are a way of replenishing that. Well, they completely ignored me. And secondly, they ignored the fact that we're microbial.
Yeah.
So if you're feeding a microbial body,
right,
why wouldn't you put that at least in the food guide to recognize that the foods we eat are going to be processed by these microbes? Just ignored it completely.
Well, they don't understand, obviously, that sheer number-wise, amount of cells, that we're outnumbered at least 10 to 1.
Well, they say 10 to 1. Others say it's 1 to 1. It doesn't matter how many it is. They're everywhere. And when we're gone, they'll be here.
Right.
So who's actually winning the war here?
Right. We're just vessels. We just travel. But let's take an example like your 2018 paper on chlorpyrifos, right?
Right.
So can you give us an example? So we know chlorpyrifos, IQ 0.7 point drop in children. It's pretty clear. It's in all the conventional produce here in the United States. Kids go off and within days their levels go down, and then they eat conventional produce, their levels go back up. So this is something we've known as a neurotoxin. What happens in the presence of microbes and chlorpyrifos? What's going on?
Well, so we looked at chlorpyrifos from the viewpoint of a honeybee. So it was the colony collapse disorder we were concerned about. Now, there's reasons like habitat loss and other things. It's not just pesticides, but it's clearly pesticides a big role. So the Drosophila is a great model. You don't need ethics approval to study fruit fly. But the fruit fly is very much like the honeybee.
Yeah.
And if you treat the pesticides like this to the fruit fly, the pesticide isn't toxic in a way that it kills it instantly.
Right.
What it does is it wrecks the immune system. And then the fly becomes susceptible to pathogenic organisms that are in the environment that normally don't do any harm. So what we did was, when we gave them a Lactobacilli probiotic, we improved the immune response and then countered the effect of the chlorpyrifos and imidacloprid. We've done it with a few pesticides, and we made them live longer. So, which I think is the right way to do this. You're not going to tell chemical companies to stop selling chemicals.
Right.
So we can't get rid of the problem as much as we should try. On the other hand, we have pests, we have malaria, we have the need for farmers to use some things so that we can live. I get that. But in order to counter it, could you use beneficial microbes? And to me, that's the place for it. So we're going to test it in bees and see if it actually comes and we prove it in the ultimate pollinator. But that's the rationale. We're countering an immune problem.
Fantastic. And what I think is genius is that you went to Africa, and here you are in this dead lake zone, and you're concerned about the people who live in that region, and so therefore you've launched a campaign to increase the consumption of probiotic yogurts.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it started in 2004 when the United Nations ambassador to AIDS in Africa was a Canadian, Stephen Lewis, and he came to our university and says, "Look, you have to help with this epidemic. This is terrible." So a guy a manager in the housing department, imagine, he phoned me up and I said, "Housing? What's this?" And he says, "Look, I get 6,000 or 7,000 first-year students every year. Maybe we could do some fundraising. Maybe we could empower them." So we had a meeting, and I said at the meeting, I said, "Look, the last thing you want to do is have people in Africa waiting for an airplane to come in every week with the answer. What you have to do is you have to give them the tools that they can do it themselves." So I said, "Why don't we teach them how to make a probiotic yogurt?" So that started it, and I donated the strain. And then these two Dutch guys came along and said, "This is cool, but there's an issue here with the probiotic strain we had to keep at an institute, and the mamas, we call them yogurt mamas, had to go and get it every day."
Yeah.
So these guys said, "No, let's make a sachet." So we now have a 1 gram sachet with 2 strains of bacteria, and it makes 100 liters of probiotic yogurt.
Oh, you're kidding! In one sachet?
Yeah, and it's 50 cents. So we make them buy it.
Yeah.
And we've now got, in fact, I just came back from Uganda. We've now got 220 community kitchens. We call them production units. They've made over 1.5 million liters of probiotic yogurt. Wow. And they're feeding over 250,000 people. Imagine.
Oh my gosh.
And it's just with essentially empowering them. Now, that's why we did studies, and we're going to continue to do studies on other benefits. So there's obvious benefits to malnutrition and things, but what about countering pesticides, aflatoxin, mercury and arsenic? And we haven't published all this yet, but the aflatoxin is a big deal in Africa, not so much here.
Mm-hmm.
It's in peanuts and corn,
Right.
and it's ironic because they used to ferment millet.
Yes.
And this was great. They had no trouble with aflatoxin, and then they came in and replaced it with maize.
Yeah.
And then the aspergillus infected the maize, and you know the politicians will come and they'll burn a big pile of maize and say, yes, we're burning it, we're destroying it. No, the people are starving, so they'll eat even if it's contaminated.
Yeah.
And so we did a study and showed the kids have got it in the system. But not only does the probiotic stop it going in, it actually degrades the aflatoxin, which is so cool. So we're very excited that not only are we providing them the means, we now have school programs that are starting right across Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, and essentially saying, why not feed them probiotic yogurt? It'll reduce the aflatoxin, it'll help their malnutrition, it gets rid of the rashes, it reduces diarrhea, and you've got a very tasty little food source.
Right.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Now, help us out. So let's imagine a person's out there thinking, oh, wow, wait a second. You're saying that somebody can eat yogurt, and then the organisms from that yogurt might colonize the intestinal tract or be present in the intestinal tract when the exposure is occurring to the aflatoxin or the arsenic or the mercury. Yeah. So you said they can degrade. So we can imagine, an organism digesting an aflatoxin, changing the chemical shape. What's going on with arsenic, or what's going on with mercury? Like, what do you see, like pre and post yogurt in children?
So it's a good thing. I mean, probiotics don't colonize per se.
Yeah, right.
So you have to keep taking them, and that's why we have these school programs. They should take it every day.
Yeah.
But what happens is, and this is part of the reason that I came up with the idea, was in vitro studies have showed that these lactobacilli can bind to metals. And so if you actually look under an electron microscope, you can see the little blobs of mercury binding to the lactobacilli.
Are you kidding me? Really?
So, in fact, we think that's one of the main ways that it comes in contact with the metal, it binds it, and then you flush it out. It doesn't get absorbed.
So when the organism dies, it actually travels out in the dead organism?
Yeah, it'd be in the dead organism because it's bound to the arsenic and the mercury. And we've done electron microscopy to show that it does that binding. There are some strains that do even more than that can sequester mercury, but we haven't used them yet in these studies. So
yeah. Now the interesting fact is when you look at your work is that it appears that it's very organism specific. So there are specific organisms that work a little better than others. Is that correct?
Well, I think to some extent, probiotics in general, I would say, is quite strain specific.
Yeah.
Having said that, for example, necrotizing enterocolitis in babies, which, by the way, in America, I don't know why this isn't standard practice. And so that's another topic.
Discussion.
If we've got time to talk about that, let me get to that.
Yeah.
But multiple strains have an effect on neck. So that's a case where it's not strain specific. And in Africa, we have two strains. We have Lactobacillus rhamnosus GR1 and Lactobacillus rhamnosus yoba, which is a generic strain of GG. So essentially you have these two, and they both work. And I think for binding to mercury and arsenic, other strains of lactobacilli would work. So I don't think that's just exclusive to the two strains we're using. Aflatoxins, we don't know enough yet to say how specific it is for the strains. And we're trying to do research in a zero budget because it's not a problem in North America where some of the funding might be. So we're probably not moving as fast as we could to find out and answer your question properly, but we'll get there.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, well, we're waiting. I'll tell you what, there's going to be people who are watching this, right? And they're going to be a little more in the mindset of like, well, great, does that mean I can go out and eat any yogurt and prevent any sort of metal toxicity? What would your answer be to something like that?
It's a very good question. So yogurt, strictly speaking, is Lactobacillus delbrueckii subspecies bulgaricus, one strain, and Streptococcus thermophilus. And so that's the definition of yogurt. We're sort of cheating a little bit because we don't need the Lactobacillus strain. We've switched it with a probiotic. It still makes yogurt. So if you were to go into the shop and buy any yogurt, they should have that Lactobacillus and the strep.
Right.
And I would think that if I was eating tuna, I would eat yogurt at the same time.
Because of the mercury.
Yeah, and because I think the Lactobacilli probably, I haven't done the experiments, but probably Lactobacillus bulgaricus would also bind to mercury. If there are other strains of probiotics added to yogurts, then that may be even better. I mean, there's some yogurts have Lactobacillus GG or Lactobacillus, I think, NCFM and LA1 and some other strains, and that might be even better. But it's interesting because when we went to Africa, we thought, well, we'll help the Africans, but the Great Lakes are contaminated with these metals. So it's not just about Africa. And I would say if you're catching fish and eating it from the Great Lakes, have some yogurt at the same time.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned something interesting. There's so many people who are going to rush out and say, like, well, I'm going to have yogurt, yes, and some don't have, the ability because of dairy intolerance or whatnot.
Yeah.
So they might be taking over-the-counter probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
What would you advise to the average person out there who wants to purchase probiotics?
In general, or for metals, or what?
In general first, and then we'll get to detox.
I would say, and I'm going to mention this tomorrow, that there's now 2 websites, usprobioticguide.com and probioticchart.ca for Canada. And it was independent of me, but it was very well respected people have said, right, the definition of a probiotic requires that you've tested them in humans. So let's look at all the probiotics on the market that have done and reported human testing. And you'd be surprised that maybe there's 400 products. There ain't 400 on the list.
Yeah.
So if I was a consumer, I would say, okay, let's just start with that. Now, if your favorite probiotic, or your company or some company says this is the best probiotics in sliced bread, and it's not on the list, I would say to that company, you know what? Get it on the list by doing a human study.
Yes.
Prove that your product actually has a benefit and define the benefit. So when you look at this table, and they've just brought out the 2018 version, supposing you look at, I better not mention names, but really well-known probiotics, $100 million sales.
Yes.
And it's for IBS.
Yes.
If you have a urinary tract infection recurrences, don't take this probiotic, right?
Right.
So on the table, you look across the list and you go, okay, Crohn's disease, no. Antibiotic-associated diarrhea, no. IBS, yes, okay. So that allows the consumer to say, okay, now if I have IBS, I have 3 choices that I could try that have done human studies, and let's see, maybe one is better than the other for me. That changes the whole way that a consumer or even a physician looks at this scenario.
Right.
Because the starting point is human documented strains.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't say anything bad about other people's strains because it may be helping someone, the magic strain, but do the testing, get it on the chart.
Yeah, makes sense. So on that same vein, there's this interesting Alex Vasquez-Manoff, right, wrote Epidemic of Absence, right, and Martin Blazer wrote the book Missing Microbes, right?
Yeah.
How much of this this epidemic of disease that we're having these days, the toxicity that we're having these days, would you attribute to microbiological changes, maybe a missing strains here and there, so a lacking biodiversity in the general population?
So it's a very tough question on 2. 1 on missing strains and 2 on biodiversity.
Yes.
I think we tend to go nuts over this biodiversity, and biodiversity means that you can say what a biodiverse community that is healthy, and you can say what it is. And that's been tough. In the vagina, you can say high biodiversity is bacterial vaginosis. It's not good.
Yes.
Low biodiversity is lactobacilli. You know what? That's good.
Yes.
In the gut, it's not so clear.
Right.
So I think we overuse the term dysbiosis.
Yes.
However, it seems to be that the more diverse your microbial community, the healthier you are. As for missing, I think that's also, I treat that with caution, because how can it be, there was one study with this guy Tom Spector ate, I think it was McDonald's for a month, only that.
Yeah.
And he lost 1,400 of his strains.
Oh, wow.
Well, did he really lose them, or did he just went below detection?
Right.
So I think I'd like to say, here are organisms that in fact we don't see anymore, but they're in the Hadza in Tanzania.
Right.
And I haven't seen that yet. So I think that the technology is not yet sensitive enough to prove they've actually vanished. Now, what I think has happened, and this is my own theory, has been the globalization of food. And the example I like to give students when I'm teaching, I'll say, in Scotland in the 60s, when I lived there, I looked forward to August. Because in August, I could get melons.
Yes.
Now, if I want melons in Canada today, I get them every single day of the year. And this has happened right across the food. And, they talk about the number of ships in the ocean at any one time that are delivering Walmart products. And so what we've done is we get Guatemala and Mexico and other places to give us food. Now, I hope we're assessing the pesticide use in those countries. But, in some cases, I worry that we're not. And even in New Zealand, when I lived there, the spraying of kiwi fruit was scary for pesticides. So now we've got this, everybody's eating the same stuff. You can eat it all year round. It's coming from different places. And guess what? We're having all these chronic disease happening. So I have to think that this globalization of food has had an effect. It's had an effect on our microbes. And because of that, you see the loss of traditional foods that we essentially came from. If you go back to humans long enough, and I lived in New Zealand, the Maoris take their meat and they put it under the ground and they cook it. They cook it. And then, and in Africa, a few years ago, there was young kids, 20-year-old students, and I said to them, so does your mum make fermented food? Yes. Do you take it? No. Why? It's not cool. It doesn't taste that great. Takes too long to make. So I said, what do you take? Coke, hamburgers. So we've kind of said, hey guys, here's a cool way of life, and it's cool as inverted commas, and the world has started to do this. And I'm not blaming McDonald's because everyone would like to have a fast hamburger, but if you change that and you've stopped eating the fermented foods that have been part of our evolution, where does that leave you? So my big kick is, let's reintroduce some of those fermented foods, and if you can't, then you bring in probiotic strains that at least perform some of the functions that they do.
That you're familiar with, Oh, on that same vein then, if we're talking about the fermented foods, and we're talking about probiotics, we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about prebiotics. So how much of the equation is the prebiotics, and how much of this dietary equation that you're talking about is kids no longer eating their root vegetables or traditional vegetable foods that might have those complex carbohydrate forms that actually feed the organisms themselves?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so one thing I want to clarify, and I don't like when people do this, they say, well, we all have probiotics in us, or every fermented food is a probiotic in us. The definition of probiotics is that if you have a probiotic in you, it means you took it. And if you have a probiotic in a fermented food, then someone has added that probiotic. So people get mixed up with, just because it's lactobacillus, it's not a probiotic. So fermented foods as a category, I think, are terrific because they have lots and lots of these organisms. And if you can take them 2-3 times a week, great. Now, the prebiotics came along because Glenn Gibson and Robert Freud who developed the original definition, and they started to look at, well, what do these beneficial microbes in us eat? And could you give them something that we would not normally digest, but they do? So this concept came out, and it's a little bit behind probiotics in terms of human studies and verification, but it's really coming along quite well. And there's studies on diabetes and other conditions that I think the prebiotics could be preferentially useful. So the key to prebiotics, though, is you generally have to take 5 grams. So that means you have to find the products that have the 5 grams. And to be honest, until recently, that's not been easy to find. So now that the products come out, then, my wife has this one that, you take a spoonful, you put it in a drink, and now you're getting the 5 grams. Companies, unfortunately, have put, say you have a yogurt, and it says with prebiotic. Well, it doesn't have 5 grams in it, so really they should not call that prebiotic. It's not enough. So then you look at, well, foods. Could you take onions and artichokes and things? Absolutely. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we take the source of the prebiotics?
Right.
So again, it gets back to diet, and I think we have failed to make these things trendy. I go back to these African kids, I'll never forget them. And I said to them, you know what? We should take your mum's fermented food, put it in this really sexy bottle, and give it a sexy name and make it cool for kids. Mm-hmm. You know what? That's what Red Bull did. Mm-hmm. I mean, who would want to drink Red Bull? And yet they have a Formula One car.
Right.
So if you did that with these fermented foods, and so anyway, I was in Africa last week. I mean, I can never describe what it's like in Kampala or these countries. It's amazing. Anyway, this research lab we went into, they took things that were purchased in the street. So these are plastic water bottles that have, I don't know, they could have been in the gutter. Yeah. They were filthy. Yeah. And inside them they had fermented millet. And then there was plastic bags of fermented millet. Now, if I took it, I'd be sick in a day. Yeah. But anyway, so street people are selling this, and there's a market for it. I'm not saying it's a great thing, but it's happening. So the research team did, they said, okay, well, why don't we ferment millet ourselves, put it in a sexy bottle, nice bottle, label what the contents are, show the probiotic that's been used, and then we'll see if people like it. Well, I tasted this, and it was just in a plastic. I was shocked. Now, we published a paper on fermenting the millet and showing how to do it. So I was really happy with that, because we had a test. Donors to our hospital by chance came to our lab, and I said, why don't we give you a taste test? And they said, what's this? This is amazing. I said, what's fermented millet? Really? Anyway, in Africa, what they've done is, they've done what I wanted them to do, and it's so tasty, it's reliable, it will reduce aflatoxins, it's not contaminated like the street vendors, and guess what? You could make it using the sachet.
No way. Wow.
So you have to bring it down to a practical level, right, and help the people change their own way of doing stuff. So you introduce it to the street sellers, now they're selling something reliable instead of the awful things that I saw. You're bringing it to kids and saying, you know what, it's cool to take this, right. And it tastes damn good. Yeah. So I think that's the way we have to go about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So now here in the States, by the way, I have to commend you on that work in Africa. That's absolutely mind-blowing that you would have such a huge impact with what you're doing right now. And
no, I think it's not me that's doing it, it's other amazing people. I think this could go worldwide. I think it's a concept that goes back to Muhammad Yunus and microbusiness. These we visited some of the women, particularly women who were trying to help, and they're sending their kids to private school. They're buying their own cows. They're paying guys to go and deliver the yogurt, all on their own, and it's independence for them.
So fantastic.
And it is, and it's not a magic bullet. It's a way of empowering people. And my wife's a teacher. We have poor kids in Canada that could benefit from this. So I hope it goes. I hope somebody comes and helps us take it worldwide. So
and for those who are not watching his research and are seeing the numbers and whatnot, can you share with us what kind of mercury levels you see from these children close to this lake pre and post the probiotics?
Well, so the mercury and arsenic that we reported in the paper was about 7 times higher than a Canadian kid. Yeah. And we were reducing arsenic by 75% and mercury by 36% in the one study that we did. Wow. Now, obviously, I'd like to repeat the study, and
sure.
but we're seeing a difference, and I'm not one for. You have to have evidence-based research. I'm absolutely, I'm very much behind that. Mm-hmm. But you see these kids, and we just did a study of 467 kids in Uganda, and the rashes that they have, which are malnourished and allergy rashes, they literally plummeted within 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we should do a randomized placebo-controlled trial. But you see the kids and the teachers will tell you and the parents will tell you there is something happening here, and it's tangible.
Yeah.
So we have to do the right science to prove it. And unlike other people who are proposing really expensive interventions, foods that are complex and you'd have to fly them in or set up a factory. No, it's a single sachet. Go on.
Yeah.
Get the milk and do it. And with the millet, if you don't like milk.
There you are.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now, we have something in the United States that's quite popular right now, the consciousness of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah.
So people are a little wary. They'll say, well, I went and got diagnosed with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I can't really take specific probiotics, or I shouldn't be taking anything that's a high fibrous food because I'll get gas, bloating, and therefore it'll exacerbate my small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. What would you say to people?
Well, I remember a long time ago, it was a guy called Dunn. He's an Irish guy, and he published this paper on Lactobacillus acidophilus NCFM. So I remember it because it's just implanted in my head.
Yeah.
And he worked on bacterial overgrowth, and he showed that if you gave that probiotic, it would reduce the effect. And if you think about it, that bacterial overgrowth is a negative thing.
Right.
Probiotic organisms are positive things. So you're not likely to take probiotics and then get bacterial overgrowth. They're going to counter that, what's happening to what's causing the bacterial overgrowth. Now, maybe some people can't take it as dairy, maybe they can't take it as vegetables, maybe a prebiotic causes more gas for them. So they have to sort of find the strains that will work. But unfortunately, I've only seen that one study on that specific population. And it comes down to it, if only our countries would fund more studies. And I become a broken record by keep saying it, but ironically with the National Institute for Health and in Canada with the Canadian Institute for Health, they don't study health.
Yeah,
they study disease. and you come along with something else, well, no, it's not great. Yeah. Probiotics, snake oil, no. That.
Yeah.
In fact, we need the studies to answer your question. Okay, is bacterial overgrowth a big problem? Which probiotics should we try? For how long? Which dose? And then work it out. Yeah.
Are you imagining that we're on the cusp of reaching a point where we come across a specific health condition, diabetes, for example, or heart disease, for example, or in your case, breast cancer that you're looking at, and we'll be able to identify maybe 3-4 specific organisms that might be assistive for that specific condition? You think we're 10 years, 20 years out from something like that?
I mean, if clinicians are watching, they're going to be already pulling their hair out saying that I'm going to treat cancer or cure cancer, and that's not what we're doing.
Right.
What we're trying to do is either delay the onset. So if you think of Angelina Jolie, the trauma of that surgery maybe wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
Because if we find that there's microbes that are playing a role in the causation of cancer, and if you can manipulate that, maybe we stop women like that having to have a mastectomy. So that to me is it's following up theory, it's science. You're then testing it and then seeing if it happens, and the implications are huge.
Yeah.
That's the approach we have to take, and I think that we're going to find that manipulation of the microbes is going to have an impact. I mean, simple things like a yogurt, was a study showed it delayed the onset of type 2 diabetes. So what does that mean? What are the organisms doing? That's a huge thing. I mean, we have, in London, Ontario, we have hundreds of kids that are pre-diabetic.
Oh yeah.
And so they're going to impact the healthcare system in Canada, and of course it's going to affect their life.
Yeah.
If you could delay that, or maybe even prevent it with manipulating the microbes, that's going to be the way to do it. I'm not sure we're going to have magic bullets, but I'm working with a company just now, and we're going to bring out strains that have definitive things. So, for example, it produces this compound, and we know this compound's important. We tested it in humans, it actually does it, and so therefore a probiotic will be designed for specific things. Now you'll tell me that's now treating a disease, and I'm going to counter that and say no. So let's go to the definition of health. Whoever invented that was having a bad night because it is the most ridiculous. There is no human being on the planet that fits the definition of health at the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
So this guy Sartorius came out with another one in 2006, and he said, really, isn't health a continuum across life? And don't we get little upsets? So if I get constipation, am I healthy or am I not? I guess for that day I'm not, but I'm still a healthy person.
Yeah.
And then if cholesterol is too high, am I a healthy person? I am, because I don't have cardiovascular disease. But you know what? My cholesterol's too high. Now, our solution as a society has been, let's give a drug with massive side effects. And what we're saying is, wait a minute, if you could manipulate the microbiome and bring down the cholesterol to a normal level, you're not making a claim that you're preventing cardiovascular disease. You're making a claim that you're bringing cholesterol to a level.
Right.
So now you can sell it as a supplement or a food.
Right.
Because if we don't do that, unfortunately the drug companies will take control of the whole thing, and FDA is already really essentially a drug company organization. They'll criticize me for that, but it was set up in a way that says food cannot prevent disease. Excuse me? Food can't prevent disease?
Right?
Well, okay,
Yeah.
Let's get the guy that goes to McDonald's
for
a month, and that's all he eats.
1,400 different strains. Yep.
So I think we have to approach it, otherwise you're getting down a drug route. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's controlled by drug companies who are overpriced products because they're writing off their failures. And I would rather see the drug companies come in a positive way and make it affordable products and work with the probiotics and biologicals is how the FDA handles it, and make this available to people who are, maybe all phases of society.
Yeah.
Why should it just be the rich people?
Yeah.
It should be people who, for whatever reason, don't have the resources, and that's exactly the message that we're doing in Africa.
With the yogurt and the millet.
I always tell kids, hands up, who decided where they were going to be born? You didn't.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault that they're born in a place that's, they've so many challenges, infectious disease, malaria included. They've got poverty, they've malnutrition, and very often there's war, and so it's not their fault. And, I have a friend that says, well, the governments are all corrupt. You know what? Governments are corrupt everywhere. Yeah. That doesn't excuse us. And you should know as Americans, because Americans are the most generous people on the planet. So I think we need to bring those things that we're doing for people in Africa, bring it back to our own countries, and help the people that are malnourished, that are at high risk of these diseases. I work with this really amazing geography guy, and he did a study in London, Ontario, and he uses GPS mapping and stuff that I don't understand, right? And he says, here's a really poor school. Really poor. These kids are, they don't have winter coats in the winter, and they don't have proper shoes and stuff. And he said there was, on average, 42 fast food restaurants around that school.
Oh my gosh.
So what do you think the parents do? Here's $5, go and get yourself lunch.
Right.
So Argentina showed us the way. They introduced this feeding program, a school feeding program in their poor schools, and every week, every day, they give 300,000 poor kids a probiotic yogurt, donated and paid by the government. Imagine.
Really?
Yeah. It's an amazing program. Now it's relying on the government, their donations, whatever, that would, the school feeding programs in the States too, but imagine if you made that a national thing.
Wow.
In Uruguay, they give every kid a computer.
Oh my gosh.
It's a plastic case. Every single kid.
Wow.
So those countries are making these decisions right across their population, saying our kids need to be educated, let's give them a laptop. In Argentina, our kids need good food, let's give them a probiotic yogurt.
Oh my gosh.
So, things are possible if you have the willpower.
Yeah.
And maybe in America, maybe you start in one state. Maybe you say, California, you know what? We're going to introduce this and see what happens.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That'd be great. Fingers crossed, somebody's watching here. They get some ideas, right?
Yeah.
So one quick thing I would love to discuss, and that is the fecal transplants. So let's imagine we have a very, very difficult case, right? Someone who has repetitive C. diff infections, for example, and they've been through so many rounds of antibiotics that the microbiome is so far diminished that they can't stop disease in their gut.
Right.
What do you think? Are we way down the line from looking at an actual supplement that people can take, like of a sterilized? I know there's some people overseas who are working on this right now. But from your standpoint, what do you think is going to happen in the future for people like this?
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, fecal transplant has a cure rate of 90% for C. diff,
Right.
which is absolutely amazing.
Right.
It's proving to be not as simple as we thought. So we do that in London, Ontario, and first of all, it's very difficult to find donors.
Yeah.
And we have extremely stringent criteria, but it's based on, so if you were the donor, it's based on your health today. But if your intestinal microbes are actually putting you at risk of something else in 20 years' time, I can't tell that just now.
It, right.
So people are worrying about down the road. The other thing, as we test in other diseases, we're finding that it's not just one transplant people need, it's repetitive.
Yes.
So it started with, probably with the people in Calgary, and at least that I know of, it may have started other places, where they started to make little capsules of stool. You can imagine eating 25 capsules of stool. It's a horrible thought.
Yeah.
And then Emal and Verco in Canada said, why don't we take what we think are the best 35 strains and make that into, in fact, I told her to call it repopulate, and she liked the idea. And so then, of course, the authority said, wait a minute, drug.
Regulate.
And I said, well, FDA wants to control your stool. You know what? Send it to them. But anyway, so repopulate came out, and then other people thought, well, is it the right 35 strains? Should it be 18 strains? So I think you're probably going to see that approach. It will take a while because it will be seen as a drug.
Yeah.
And I think the exciting thing is maybe in MS, and maybe in some patients in MS, it's going to work in some way, delaying the disease or having fewer side effects or whatever that is. I think it's worth trying. We should do the right studies. We should have some control. So the control usually is putting your own stool back.
Right.
The Dutch have done studies, as in other places, where the transplant is gone this way to get the small intestine, then the colon. So I think it's going to be teaching us a lot of lessons. I don't think we know all the answers yet, but it's great to see people trying it. And at the end of the day, you know, I always think, I'm not a physician, but the person in front of you is a patient in pain, or we're trying to help that person.
Right.
And if somehow, for each one we help, maybe someone is not helped, in which case we have to learn why that didn't work. So responders versus non-responders, find out why they don't respond, and then you manipulate the treatment to make sure as many people as possible respond. So I think it will continue like that.
Oh, fantastic. That's really exciting stuff. Bringing it back to the Environmental Health Symposium here, I always find it fascinating, all the papers that I'm reading now, about how many different ways that probiotics interact with chemicals as they're coming into the system and or change what happens to the system in general so they can process the toxins. Can you give some people examples, choose a toxin, for example, and talk to us about how a microbe might change the human interaction with that pesticide or metal or whatever it might be?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is it binds to metal like mercury and you poop it out. I think that I'm taken by some studies. I'm going to show this graph tomorrow. I got it from the web. And it was the number of pharmaceutical agents in our water supply.
Right.
And I'm taken by this because if I was to take one of those agents and go out and sell it, the drug company would be on me like a
patent, right?
It would be on me. No, we're suing you. This is mine.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, this is yours, right? It's in the wastewater treatment plant. could you please take it back?
Yeah.
Now, it turns out there are microbes that break them down.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to look at microbes that break them down in wastewater treatment plants and sewage plants, and then try and maybe backtrack and say, okay, are they in us, and which ones should we supplement to break down the drugs that are affecting us? We haven't worked out which of those drugs, because it's trace elements we're taking, and it's very hard to prove cause and effect of continuous trace elements of these chemicals. That if there's ones that we're really worried about, maybe we go after them first. So we're doing some work just now. I have a student who's been working on PCBs. Now, you'd think we'd solved PCBs because we banned them.
Right.
Well, the problem is they're still in the ground and they're in the water.
Yeah.
And for indigenous people who hunt and eat fish, unfortunately, they're still taking them in. So in a case like that, could you have a probiotic strain that either breaks down or somehow reduces the uptake of a PCB? Now you're being quite specific in your targeting. I think we have to do it from the soil, from a waste treatment plant, from the whole sort of way we think. I go back to the honeybees, so that you're taking this beneficial microbe right across the whole chain. Yeah. And I mean, there are people working on biofertilizers, because if you have a organic fertilizer, they tell me that 1% of it stays in the field. The rest is going in the water. That's not good enough. So if you could replace that with something that is a microbe, then you've contributed hugely to what eventually is going to affect the human. So I really would like to see it right across the board. The potential is phenomenal. And it's a microbial world, and we're so microbial ourselves. Why wouldn't we do it?
Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk to you about this one then. Our experience with the microbiome, of course, everybody thinks the placenta is sterile, and we're now seeing maybe perhaps it's not, but as the child is birthing and whatnot, we're seeing some of the work from other people that there's a specific organism that cleaves this human milk oligosaccharide, the infantis, right? And so the replenishment of infantis, if we're missing specific strains at birth and they're not then colonized effectively with the proper prebiotics, if you want to call them that, or prebiotic food from breast milk, and the child is then deficient, we see all the rashes that you're speaking of and all the immune developmental issues. What is the solution there? Are we promoting less C-sections? Are we doing swabbing? Are we trying to get people to breastfeed as much as possible? What happens during the birthing process to guarantee that we're going to have less issues further on?
Well, I think it happens well before the birthing process. So I think, and again, I've got a slide tomorrow. You're taking away all my slides for now. But,
it's okay. This is
So I have a slide that I look at the stages of the fetus. Yeah. So if you look at after 4 weeks, the heart has started beating. If you look after 16 weeks, the baby can suck its finger. So in 16 weeks, most women, well, certainly 12 weeks, they may not even know they're pregnant. What have we done in terms of microbes in food for these processes? The answer is nothing. Right? Now, in a pregnancy, a 9-month pregnancy, we maybe give folate, iron, vitamin A, maybe. That's about it. Yeah. So if whether you believe the microbes are in the amniotic fluid and the placenta or not, without question, you're not going to have an evolution, a baby coming into a microbial world never having seen a microbe. So it has to have seen a microbe in some shape or form, even if it's the molecules of a microbe. Yeah. So my thing is, what is happening in the development of all these critical organs during the 9 months? And I've asked obstetrics gynecologists, they have no clue. Because we've never studied it. Right. And for example, the brain is mostly made up of fat. Yeah. Now, if a Lactobacilli strain produced alpha-linoleic acid, would increased production of alpha-linoleic acid somehow get to the brain in the fetus and help it develop more? I have no idea. Right. But I'm saying we've got this thing, everything against fat. Fat's terrible. No, it's not terrible. Strains. What strains are affecting these organs being developed in the fetus? So I think we need to go back to that, and I think there's incredibly exciting things that could happen just by matching up microbes and nutrition if it's even possible. Okay, now the baby is born. Well, I'm going to show a map. You show a map of C-sections. Number one in the world at C-sections, Brazil, because it's unionized medicine. But my wife, we had twins, and they were born at week 32, premature. So we were in intensive care unit for 5 weeks. It wasn't nice at all. And it happened. They were born December 18th, and on New Year's Eve, a woman came in to have her baby as close to midnight as possible because she wanted to be the first baby born in the new year and get her picture in the newspaper. And we've totally forgotten that, you know what, you get your microbes initially from mum, and maybe we need to be treating mum with certain probiotic strains, maybe infantis, so that when the baby's born, she passes it on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, okay, breastfeeding. So I asked the kids in the class, number one country in the world for breastfeeding. It's developing countries like Canada and Britain and America, isn't it? No. It's Rwanda on the last list I looked at. Okay, which is the developing country? Sorry, remind me again? And so you say, okay, how's your baby getting the microbes then? You didn't give it through the vagina.
Yep.
You didn't give it through breast milk, so it must be the clothing. Okay, so what clothing are you giving? Well, it came from Bangladesh. Okay, it was wrapped in something, and so you're taking a chance. And I would rather we don't take a chance, and that's why people are studying, can you give a microbe that hasn't been passed on in this process, that in the case of Bifidobacterium utilizes the milk oligosaccharide. Now, not every woman can breastfeed. There's reasons why they can't. And there is a good process of donor milk, but in donor milk they pasteurize it, so you're getting the benefits of donor milk but not the microbes. And I've been sort of trying to push this this concept of how do you improve the 9-month process, and then the milk, and of course the one study that said you should swab the vagina and then swab the baby. I mean, I think that's a good idea. I mean, but practically, I don't know. If 1 in 6 American women has genital herpes, what are you going to put in the sponge? And are they really testing for the pathogens that are going to be passed on? So it might come out that it's specific microbes that will be developed and then put in the sponge. But that's going to be a drug. I mean, FDA is not going to allow you to give, to put in a newborn baby's mouth microbes that they haven't approved. It'll never happen.
Wow.
So, and then I go back to my box. So, my kids were born at 32 weeks. They were in intensive care unit. They were very small. They lived in a box, and the box is the neonatal intensive care unit. Which beneficial microbes enter that box? None. The only thing that enters that box are the people, the parents, the staff who are caked in drug-resistant bacteria, because that's all we've given these kids. And my thing to the NICU people is, okay, you complain about probiotics not being approved and shouldn't be used in an NICU, and yet all the drugs you use on these premature babies were not tested on premature babies. They were tested on healthy babies, right? So, don't criticize us without criticizing yourself. Now you say, okay, you tell me another way that we can get beneficial microbes into this room. Because if you don't get it, it'll be necrotizing enterocolitis, it'll be other infections, or you'll give so many antibiotics that, as Martin Blazer says, is then going to put them on a trajectory that is not healthy for the rest of their life. So it boggles my mind why particularly American physicians are so reticent to take on probiotics to prevent NEC. In our hospital, after a lot of fighting by me, they started it, and their rate went from, it was about 3% down to almost nothing.
Wow.
So if that's our hospital, one of the best hospitals in Canada, and it's now in Montreal and other hospitals, we're not a third world country. This is Canada. We're doing it. What's stopping America? I don't get it. So
ego, maybe. You know,
I think it's lawyers. I think it's lawyers
Ah.
because the clinicians are worried about being sued. I think they're also worried because there was that one case where there was a mold and so I think, yes, we absolutely have to make sure the probiotics are extremely well made in good facilities. But the lawsuit that should happen should be suing because they didn't get probiotics. That'll change.
Wow. That'll be a new day, won't it? Well, gosh, I can't commend you enough. Thank you. I mean, the reality is Einstein used to tell us, right? You know, how we can tell where we're evolving and where we're going is our sense of liberation from the self, right? So I used to always think that we are this super organism, right? We are not just humans on this planet. We are part of this dynamic, diverse system. Yeah. And it's become very clear that you understand that, and you're kind of helping all of us kind of reconnect with what it is that brings life on this planet. It is the microbes, it is the bees, and it is each other.
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
fact that you are reaching out to African children who are exposed to these chemicals in this lake and giving them probiotics and reversing their disease outcomes is just absolutely amazing. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of our entire community, and we really appreciate you being here at the Environmental Health Symposium.
Well, you know, this symposium is bringing together people from different disciplines.
Yes.
And as a society, we tend to like boxes, and I've always been a person who rebels against boxes. Don't put me in a box.
Right.
And we have to be open to other ideas. They won't all be right, but the environment has a major impact on health. And unless we start really bringing in this not only to isolated conferences, but into teaching of medical students, into practice of how we approach things, then we'll be in stalemate as a race, and we can't do that. So I'm learning stuff too all the time. So thanks for having me here.
Oh, it is absolutely our pleasure, and you are pressing the envelope farther out and out and out, and I hope everybody listens to your work. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.